You're in the kitchen.
Welcome to another edition of Kitchen Conversations. I'm Jason Aspis, and if you're watching this, you probably love pickleball. And while the game has been around for a long time, it's still in many ways immature. New players are coming to the game every single day. Athletes from other sports are bringing their skill set and applying them to pickleball, which is great for the game. It evolves the game with new moves, new attacks and defenses, and new strategies to combat them all. It is a sport that is continuing to grow and evolve, and I love that about this game. But it's not just the players that are evolving the game. The equipment manufacturers are also bringing new technologies to the world of pickleball. Balls and paddles are constantly being designed and tested to provide an advantage to the players that play them. So how do we ensure that there is a level playing field when it comes to this equipment? Well, that's why all legitimate sports have a governing body, in which this case is USA Pickleball. And the person who is responsible to ensure the equipment is compliant with all USA Pickleball's guidelines is Donn. Donn serves as the managing director of both pro player relations and equipment compliance. His equipment compliance responsibilities include the acquisition and testing of approved paddles and balls to ensure they continue to be manufactured according to USA Pickleball guidelines. It's been a busy week for Donn. Last week, USA Pickleball removed the CRBN line of paddles from their approved paddles list, which happened to coincide with the US Open. And as you can imagine, controversy ensued. And while speculation has run rampant and all sorts of theories and hearsay being thrown around on all corners of the internet, I'm very fortunate to have with us today the man who actually knows the facts and how these rules work. He has graciously agreed to help provide some perspective and clarity on the situation. So I want to welcome Donn to Kitchen Conversations. Donn, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
I'm doing wonderful. Thanks for joining us. I know it's been a crazy week, and I'm thankful for you to make the time to kind of set the record straight and let us see behind the curtain of how these rules are applied and how they work. I want to start with you. What's your background? How long have you been with USA Pickleball, and where did you come from?
Well, I've been working with USA Pickleball for approximately 3 years now. I was hired originally to develop a compliance program because prior to me coming on board and developing this program, when a paddle was sent in and passed, and it is now on the approved list, there was never really any way of checking it. There was some checks and balances, but with all the paddle manufacturers coming on board constantly and all the new technologies and all the new surfaces and all the new, polypropylenes and all the different stuff, it was going to take somebody to constantly be involved in the retesting of paddles to make sure that they were still being produced using the original specifications and tolerances. So it took about a year to build the program. The manufacturers were heavily involved in it because it's really their program. It's about a level playing field for the manufacturers as well as the players. So anyway, that's how we got this started. And now today it's full bore, straightforward, and it's a constant full-time job for me.
How long ago was that when you came on board?
How long? I'm sorry.
How long ago was it that you came on board with
about
USA Pickleball?
3 years.
Okay.
About 3 years ago.
And can you tell us about the testing, the process of testing paddles, the process of getting USAP approval? How does that work?
So you're not talking about compliance. You're talking about becoming and getting on the approved list to begin with.
Correct.
That is really, so a manufacturer signs up and becomes a manufacturer in good standing. And then there's a process that they have to go through. And that process includes, filling out a lot of information and things like that. But when it finally happens, paddles are sent to the National Technical Services, NTS, and they run the two paddles that are sent to them through a gambit of tests to make sure that they all fall within, that every single part of it falls within the tolerances and specifications that are required to be an approved paddle. So once that happens, I get the results of that, and then I have a team which is made up of the Equipment Evaluation Committee, and it's Carl Smits, John Anderson, and myself. We also get the paddles, and we look at them, hit with them, look at it, just make sure that we think everything is correct with them, and assuming that we pass it and the lab passes it, it gets on the approved paddle list.
Great. And that, let me just be clear that when a brand has a new paddle, it's not across the whole brand. If you're a brand and you have one paddle, each model has to go through the same process. Is that correct? That's
overall, that's correct. However, it's the exact same paddle, but let's say you've made the handle of the paddle a little longer, but the surface is the same, the polypropylene is the same thickness, everything else about the paddle is the same. It doesn't have to go through all the tests at NTS. It comes to the EEC. I have a warehouse where I have thousands of paddles. I go pull the original paddle and I compare it to make sure everything tests out the same for me. The only difference is that handle's a little longer, which is legal. So then we just approve it as a similarity. It doesn't go through all of the testing that the original one went through to get on the approved list.
And how often is it that a manufacturer is trying to kind of skirt the system or game the system? Does that ever happen?
I don't believe any manufacturer ever tries to game or skirt the system. This is a pretty reputable group of people that are involved in this. Like I said, this compliance program is really their program. They're the ones that wanted it. They wanted to make sure that it's a level playing field for everybody. So I can't come up with one time where I think somebody tried to game or skirt the system.
Okay.
There's mistakes made, don't get me wrong.
Sure.
But not intentionally.
Sure. Who's responsible for testing the paddles when it comes to compliance? Once they've been approved and then they're out into the marketplace, how do we know that they are still compliant? How does that process work?
That is me. So my job is to purchase, and I do it as a secret shopper. I will call different resellers and I'll order paddles, and maybe I'll order 10 different paddles from, and I'm just going to make up a name, Pickleball Central. I'll order 10 paddles from them and have them shipped to an address. Now I take those paddles and I start doing field tests in my home where it's a quiet environment and everything's correct. If I find a paddle that I go, wow, this paddle's it's pretty close to right at the tolerances, I will then call the reseller, purchase another paddle, and have it shipped directly to NTS. And NTS will test it for me and let me know whether it passes. If it does pass, everything's great. If it doesn't pass, I send a second paddle to NTS to make sure that one wasn't just the one off that was not correct. And if that second paddle also fails, then I contact the manufacturer and they realize that their paddle is no longer going to be on the approved paddle list. And of course, we eventually work together as a team and try to figure out what went wrong, when it went wrong, what we can do to bring it back into compliance. And, then we work towards an end goal of making everybody happy, the consumers, the manufacturer, and myself.
So let me dig into that for a second, because the statement that USA Pickleball released earlier this week mentioned that a manufacturer will be given a warning if their paddle is tested and not compliant before it is removed from the approved list. Is that correct?
I don't think that was, to my knowledge, that was not a statement that I made or USA Pickleball made.
Okay. Okay. So if you fall out of compliance, you are removed from that list.
If your paddle does not meet the requirements to be on the approved paddle list, we remove the paddle from the approved paddle list, and we notify the manufacturer that there's a problem.
Okay.
And so.
Okay. Interesting. And so tell me the difference. What is the difference between a lab test and a field test? What is there different technology used? Different,
yeah. A field test is nothing more than, let's just say I'm at a tournament and a manufacturer says, "Hey, Donn, can you throw us your meter on this thing?" And I've been working on some surfaces and I just want to get an idea whether this one's going to be no problem or, boy, I'm right on the edge. So I'll do that for them. And I'll say, well, here's your results of this one thing. I'm not going to do an actual test out in the field because a field test does not qualify in any way, shape, or form as being a true test. All I'm doing is getting an idea, giving them the answer on, wow, that's pretty close. It's right there on the edge, but it doesn't really mean anything other than, truthfully, sometimes it'll give me a data point. But most of the time, these paddles aren't even in production. These are just surfaces that they're working on and they're considering. And so it really doesn't mean a lot because the paddle could be a year out from ever being built.
Right. Do you travel with your roughness tester?
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes, I do.
And just to be clear, that's a Starrett. Is that right?
Starrett. Yeah, Starrett meter.
Okay.
It's a surface roughness tester, and the brand I use is Starrett. Gotcha.
And so obviously we have tons of paddles in the marketplace now. Presumably you can't test all the paddles. How is that randomness done? Is it completely random? Is it by complaint? Is there a process to that?
Well, it is done randomly year round, but if I get complaints from manufacturers, if I begin receiving complaints from players or tournament directors, those are data points that I look at and go, okay, I probably need to look into possibly secret shopping one of these paddles and take a look at it. Now, understand that the manufacturers own this program. I mean, they're the ones that developed it. They're the ones that are paying for it, actually. And when a manufacturer does something, has a complaint, most of the time, they've probably tested the paddle themselves to make sure before they call me. Or they'll have videos of them actually testing the paddles and send them to me. Those kind of things are important. I mean, that really shows that they've done their homework. I probably need to take it from here and look into it. It's sort of the same thing with players. However, you'd be surprised how many players send me an email and say, I just lost to a guy that I know I can beat, and he was using a so-and-so paddle, and I can't believe how many great shots he hit, and I think you need to look at that paddle. Well, I don't know who this person is. They can't tell me what the actual name of that paddle was or what model. So I get a lot of complaints that I go, okay, well, I can't do much about that. But when I hear multiple complaints from players, from tournament directors, manufacturers, everybody, I absolutely, that's now on my radar, and I begin looking at those paddles.
Well, you can be sure that next time I play someone who hits an amazing shot against me, you're going to get an email.
Okay.
I'm going to take pictures. I'll have all the evidence.
I'm ready for it.
So tell me about the readings on the test. Is there a threshold to this? Are manufacturers allowed to go up to a certain number? Obviously, to get such consistency Do you allow for it to be just on that line, or do we have a hard line that we follow?
We have a hard line that we follow. Now, I did make some changes to the testing procedure. Every paddle that is truly tested, we will take 6 readings from each side of the paddle. Each side, those 6 readings on the first side are averaged to make sure that the average stays within the tolerances allowed, which would be 40 for the RT and 30 for the RZ. But it used to be, before I changed it, every single number was for itself. So you might get one that's really low, 22, 21. It's a really smooth paddle. And then all of a sudden, for some reason, I got a reading of 41 on one. I went, and so it used to be that paddle's out. That's no longer legal. It was not a great system, so I changed it to an average to make it fair for everybody. So basically, there is no tolerance to be above my line. Let's just say it's 40, then I could easily say, well, the tolerance is 20 plus or minus 20. I mean, I do not say, well, it was 40.2, so I'm going to allow it to be good. It either passes or it doesn't.
Got you. Okay. So the CRBN paddle, which got delisted, last week, why did they get delisted?
Well, in all fairness, the testing process is an open book, but the results are not. I do not share the results with anybody other than the manufacturer. All you can really be sure is that something wasn't right and the paddle was removed from the approved paddle list. But this is not something, I don't share the results with the public as far as the paddles.
Okay. But we could surmise that something in the testing did not go right, and they were then removed from the list and then spoken to about that to figure out how to get back into compliance.
100%. 100%.
Okay. Got it.
Because both of us wanted, the manufacturer and the governing body, USA Pickleball, wants to solve this problem. What went wrong? At what time did it go wrong? Why did it go wrong? And what can we do to mitigate this problem, make sure it never happens again? And, what steps need to be taken in order to put this back on the approved list? And I know CRBN wants that and USA Pickleball wants that.
Got it. So why the timing? Let's talk about the timing of this, right? Obviously, kind of unfortunate timing in the middle of the US Open, and particularly for the players that were playing CRBN paddles. And just for the record, we're calling it CRBN. Sometimes people call it Carbon, but it's officially CRBN, so that's why we're referring to it as such. But why the timing? Why was it at the US Open? Is there any significance to that?
Well, the US Open there's no significance to the fact that it happened during the middle of the US Open. None. It's unfortunate that it was in the middle of a tournament, but the paddles were sent in for testing. I really believed I would get the results probably when I got back to California from Florida, maybe Monday or Tuesday, but I got the results back overnight. And when I got those results back and I looked at, what they found at the lab, I was like, oh no. Okay, so now what do? The bottom line is I have to understand, and I hope everyone understands, it's never the wrong time to do the right thing. And the right thing is to stop people from playing with a paddle that gives them an unfair advantage. If I could have done it before the tournament started, great. Unfortunately, this happened in the middle of the tournament. But I had to make the decision whether I should just ignore it and allow people to continue to play with it because it started that way? Or do I try to do my job and make it a level playing field for everybody that's still out there playing? And it wasn't just the US Open. I mean, the Mid-South Regionals was going on, which was a sanctioned tournament, which means they were notified that all the paddles no CRBN paddle could be played with at that tournament. And there was a tournament starting the next day in Mesa, and they had to be notified it was a sanctioned tournament that no one could play with the paddle. So people think it just, that it was sad that it happened during the middle of the US Open, but it affected more than just the US Open.
So why, let's just get to the timing part of this. Why did it happen then, not a week before or 2 weeks before?
It happened when I test the paddle. I only test the paddle when I can buy it from a reseller. This was my first opportunity to actually purchase a CRBN paddle from a reseller, which at the US Open turned out to be Pickleball Central. They had them for sale. It's the first time I've ever seen them for sale from a reseller other than the manufacturer themselves. Also, when I got there, 2 different manufacturers had purchased them and said, these things are not legal, and I'm sending them to the lab, and I'm going to, show you this. And I said, it's not necessary. I will purchase paddles, and I will send 2 different ones to the lab. So I just did my job, did what I do at many tournaments. This is how I purchase paddles. At a lot of tournaments, I just walk up and buy 5 different paddles from a reseller, and then bring them home and test them. And then, as I stated earlier, if I find some data point that makes me go, whoa, wait a minute here, then I purchase another one and have it shipped directly to the lab.
Okay, so you had tried to purchase the CRBN paddle previously, but not available from retailers that you went to. Obviously, it was a hot paddle, and
well, there wasn't any, to my knowledge. I didn't know of any resellers that had them. Certainly, I could have purchased them directly from CRBN, but that's really not how I try to do it. I try to make sure I get it from a reseller where they're out in the marketplace for sale. So that's really how the system works. It's really more about secret shopping them than anything else.
Okay, and then let me ask you about the model that was tested. I believe they have 3 different models or variations of the same model, but different batches of paddles that have been manufactured. And in their statement that they have on their website, they say that their first 2 continue to test properly. It was this last batch that did not do so, and it's marked differently with white letters. But all the paddles have come off the list. Is there any reason for that, or is just too hard to differentiate, or have we tested all 3 of them? Where does that stand?
Okay. I have no knowledge of exactly when the problem started with CRBN. I understand they made a statement and said our first 2 tested perfectly. It's only part of this last batch. Well, yes, that's their statement, but I don't know that for a fact. This is going to take some time to figure out exactly when this train came off the tracks and, what we're going to do about fixing it and making sure that those paddles that are out there right now that are not meeting the requirements to be on the approved paddle list, I have to figure out exactly how I'm going to differentiate those paddles from paddles from this point forward. Because if, let's just say I was to say, okay, you just sent me 2 paddles, they passed, you're back on the list. What about all those paddles that are out there? And I don't know how many there are, and you don't know how many there are, and I assure you they don't know how many there are. They're hoping that it's just from this last batch. But my point is what's going to keep those people from taking that paddle and going, okay, I'm back on the list. I'm going to use this paddle that gives me an unfair advantage. This is going to take some work to make it fair to everybody. We need to be fair to CRBN. We need to be fair to all of the players out there that are competing against somebody with that paddle. And we have to make it fair for all the manufacturers. So it's not something that I'm going to be able to fix tomorrow. We have meetings every single day at USA Pickleball about this. And I'm hoping to have a meeting this afternoon, actually, with Garrett, the owner, and talk about, what's the next step? What do we have to do? And, this is an ongoing process to make it right.
Is there anything that CRBN could have done differently to avoid being in this position? Like anything that you see that they could have either preemptively done this or alerted you, or is there anything that you see?
Well, I mean, I can't speak intelligently about what they could have done. Did they have a quality assurance program in place in China? I don't know. I don't know what they did, what they didn't do, how many paddles they checked, how often they did a quality assurance on their paddles. But at some point, somewhere down, in the past, the paddles began coming over here and being sold out into the public that weren't necessarily within the specifications and tolerances required. So I had to take that step of removing it.
Got it. So, there are a lot of theories out there, a lot of speculation that CRBN was the only paddle removed, while many paddles have this carbon fiber face. Obviously, there are a few other brands that have similar surfaces. Why were they not tested? And maybe they were. Were they tested? They obviously were not removed. Have those other ones been tested?
It's an ongoing testing process. Ongoing. It never stops. I mean, it's hard for me. I can't even show you how many boxes and boxes and boxes of paddles I have that are in the process of being tested that I buy and send in for testing. And this Torrey 700, which is the face that they use for CRBN, the Joola paddle,
Electrum.
There's about 10 to 12 manufacturers using that face, and they get tested constantly. Now, Joola's brand new. I mean, I dare anybody to be able to call around and find a reseller right now that has a Joola paddle that'll sell it. I mean, there's just none out there right now. Now, that video that you saw of me sitting a start meter on top of one of the paddles that someone had, that is in no way a true test of whether a paddle is going to be should be removed from an approved list or not. All that was one reading I took.
Let me just stop you there, because some people might not be familiar with this video. A video was leaked from the US Open of you with your roughness test and a Joola paddle. I don't think you knew that you were being videoed. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Okay, so you had no knowledge that you were actually being videoed of this. It was a informal setting. This was not a real test, I take it, or was it?
Well, the gentleman asked me, would you throw your start meter on this paddle? And I said, well, I'm not going to test the paddle for you, but I'll give you one quick reading, but it means nothing. This is just, let me just, and it was kind of also for my own knowledge. It's, every time I do this, I learn something about a paddle too. And now is it on my radar now? Probably. So I put the stirrup meter on it. I took the reading and I said, okay, well, I'm not going to test it for you, but I took this one reading. It's a little high, but let's never forget that I take 6 readings and average them. So there's always one reading means nothing. It means nothing at all. So, so he asked me to do a second paddle. I set the stirrup on that and I said, yeah, it's a little high too. So, but this means nothing. I'm not testing the paddle here. You just asked me to do this. So I did it and, whatever. And I moved on. And then all of a sudden people are saying this paddle is illegal. That's not true. This paddle failed Donn's test. That's not true. There wasn't a test. It has taken a life of its own. It's all off this video that I didn't know he was videoing.
Yeah, and I saw actually today, Richard Lee, who's the CEO of Joola, put out a video of them testing the paddle themselves with the same, roughness tester, and went through the process of how that works and talking about the remote control and putting on a flat surface. Obviously, what it looked like in the video, it was like on a kind of a wicker chair.
Correct. It was not, and they vibrate when the meter starts moving around. It's not a true reading. I just was doing him a favor and just put it on there, looked at it, and walked and left. And it turned, like I said, it got a life of its own. That all of a sudden it failed my test, and it wasn't a test.
So. Okay, fair enough. I just wanted to clear that up. Donn, is there anything that you want to say that I haven't asked you about that can kind of, that you want to put out there?
Well, not really. I mean, I do want everybody to understand that CRBN wants to get this paddle back on the approved list as quickly as possible. Of course, we want to get it back on the approved list as quickly as possible. We're working as a team. We'll be working with them to figure out what the process is going to be and what steps need to be taken in order to mitigate this problem. And nobody wants that to happen faster than they do, but it still has to be a process where at the end, I'm comfortable as the representative for the governing body, that I'm comfortable that we figured out what the problem was. We're sure that the paddle will be able to be identified as a paddle from this point forward, so that we can't have paddles that don't meet the criteria being used in tournaments as we move forward. That's the only fair thing to do. And it's not something that happens overnight. Like I said, we'll work hand in hand with CRBN. We'll fix this problem. Their paddles will be eventually put right back on the approved paddle list. And I'm sure they will have a better understanding of what it's going to take to make sure that this doesn't happen again. I mean, because they don't want it to happen again. Somewhere something went wrong at the factory in China, and so I'm sure they're going to work with that factory, and I'm sure they're going to have a quality assurance program in place.
Yeah, and hopefully this is a wake-up call to all manufacturers. We have a lot of new manufacturers coming into the space, and hopefully this is a wake-up call to make sure that you guys aren't messing around. If you fall out of compliance, you're going to fall off that list, and that's going to cause more headaches than it's worth. So there you have it. Well, look, Donn, I really appreciate the time for you, what you do for the sport, and for the time you took with us today to kind of let us see what goes into this process, and to see that, this isn't a witch hunt. This is a process. And, unfortunately, CRBN fell outside of that, those specs. But I appreciate your candor and educating myself and the broader pickleball community on how these guidelines work, and what you do to ensure the paddles we play with and play against are within the guidelines and provide a fair playing experience. So thank you.
It's all about making it a level playing field for everybody. It's, the player with a better piece of equipment shouldn't that is not within tolerances shouldn't win that match because they had something that wasn't correct. It should be level, and the best player during that one match should probably win. And that's my job, is to make sure that everybody is playing with a piece of equipment that is approved. So, and I take it seriously. And so does USA Pickleball take it very seriously.
Yeah, and we appreciate that. And I appreciate all the hard work that you guys do. And thank you for taking the time. I appreciate it. Have a wonderful weekend. I hope that this gets resolved soon, and everyone will be back playing with their carbon paddles in no time.
Okay, thank you for having me. I appreciate your time.
You got it. Thank you, Donn.
Okay. Thank you, sir.